Welcome to Political Paradigm. I'm Terry Ikumi. It's breaking. For gunmen to attack the Just University community and leave behind such devastation and sorrow tells a lot about our security situation. Now, the 48-hour curfew imposed by the Plateau State government is just about over, and the University of Jos has suspended examinations. Some reports suggest that the death toll could be higher, but the governor of Plateau State puts the number at 28, insisting that the state will not bow to terror. Meanwhile, another incident occurred in Kaduna State where 13 people were reportedly killed in a separate attack at a wedding. Well, let's go into the conversation now with Barrister Felix Morka, who is the National Publicity Secretary of the All Progressives Congress. Barrister Felix Morka, welcome to Political Paradigm.
Thank you very much.
Well, we should be speaking about the convention. It was a successful one, it was a colorful one, but I think it will be only fair if we start off this conversation by speaking about the security situation in Jos and Kaduna State, where scores of people have now lost their lives, and a lot of concerns have now been raised, But I would like to first get your thoughts, and perhaps you could speak for your party on what it means or what it feels about the security situation based on what's just happened.
What happened in Jos and Kaduna were really, devastating, heartbreaking on so many levels. Because in Jos, people just gathered, living their lives. And, were mowed down by gunmen without any reason, justification, or provocation. So clearly, those who perpetrated this act just meant to do evil, just meant to take people's lives for whatever reason, they had, which I believe was meant to just cause chaos, havoc, and send this signal of insecurity, in the country. And, sadly, as much as our law enforcement, agents are, doing their best to contain this menace, you can't totally anticipate where these things happen, because, it's in the mind. The people who do this, even when they're walking through the streets, you may not necessarily know what they have in mind. So, it's a challenge. But, the good thing is that, the government of this country, Mr. President, the law enforcement, and our, security forces are working tirelessly, bring this nonsense to stop, because it shouldn't be.
I'd like to get your thoughts on the fresh concerns being raised around Christian genocide.
No, I don't think it rises at that level, because first, we don't know everything about this incident. I'm still very fresh and under some inquiry to ascertain first the motives, who did this. No one has taken responsibility so far that I know. So I think it'd be a bit hasty to jump into that conclusion that this was targeted at Christians, because in that incident in Jos, from the reports, not all of those who died were not all Christians. There were others who died there who were not Christians. So, look, these people are citizens, whether they're Christians, they're Muslims, or they're atheists. They are citizens of Nigeria and shouldn't, lose their lives in these circumstances. So I think that any hasty attempt to profile this as yet another incident targeted at Christians meant to, genocide is a very specific, construct, both legally and morally and internationally. The sense in which genocide is used is more specific than we're throwing it around right now, because Nigeria is dealing with, obviously insecurity that's been with us for a long time. The government is doing its best to, tackle that. But I think that when we begin to create this difference between, certain victims and others, even when, yes, we recognize that because of the theater where this violence is unfolding, and, sometimes what appears to be the targeting of Christians because of those who are perpetrators of it, we must also stand together as a country and as a people, rather than just allow, this to become, a Christian versus, Muslim kind of, conversation. I think we have mutual interest to protect our people irrespective of their religious identity. But I imagine that the president's priority is not necessarily to issue a statement, but to, rally, the security forces and law enforcement to go, hunt down the perpetrators of this. And I'm sure that's what's going on. Proper, directives usually will be given and have been given to, law enforcement. Even Governor Muftuan, when he spoke to some of the relations of the victims, did make clear that, the government, both of the state and of the national government, will do everything within their power to bring the perpetrators of this to justice. And I think that's the priority here, to bring them to justice, but also to take, efforts to prevent a repeat of this sort of event.
But this may now sound like a regular conversation. Every time an incident happens, you hear that that the security agencies have been mobilized or mandated to move. And then people begin to question whether this APC government, since President Muhammadu Buhari, is really fighting insecurity. We all recall that in 2014, ahead of the election, that insecurity cost President Goodluck Jonathan his job. President Muhammadu Buhari came in with a mandate to address insecurity. He failed in addressing insecurity. President Tinubu came in, and one of the agenda on his manifesto was to tackle insecurity. It almost seems like it's now getting worse. And the question is, well, this is an election year. And while we may not want to politicize this issue, we must not look beyond the leadership issue as far as it's concerned. And Nigerians will be choosing new leadership in 2027. Do you think that Nigerians are satisfied with the way the APC government is handling insecurity in the country?
Terry, let's be very honest with ourselves. In the United States of America, school shootings and mass shootings are, a recurrent experience. How come America has not managed to entirely prevent mass shootings in the United States with all of its power and resources and technology? I mean, they are the leader of the world in terms of that whole power to engage, on the security front. How come they've not managed to anticipate every incident of a student or someone who just picks up a gun to shoot people and kill people? Every administration in the United States has tackled that problem, but the problem remains. You see, there is no design by which the mind of another human being. There's none. Anyone who wishes to do evil, who wants to do evil, may actually succeed in doing evil. If anyone wants to go to a market square and stab somebody, listen, when they're leaving from their home with a knife, there's no way really for, if it's concealed, for law enforcement to know that. So look, the point I'm making is that when you generalize as you just did, that's really, not getting the point.
So
missing the point.
So here's the point. Here's the point based on the American situation which you painted.
Yes.
We all know that the issue with mass shootings in the U.S. is because of their gun laws. And then it raises questions around the political will of every leader that has taken over power in the U.S. to address the issue of gun laws. That conversation is rife. But most importantly, for every shooting that's happening in the U.S., the gunman has either been killed or arrested either immediately or within a couple of hours. The problem in Nigeria, which we have seen over time, is that perpetrators of this violence have not been brought to book. I was listening to Honorable Bagos, who's from Plateau, yesterday, and he raised the same issue. It's been 48 hours. There's been no arrest. We don't even know who perpetrated this violence. And this is just one of several incidents. So can you really compare this situation with the United States?
No, I vehemently disagree with you.
And on what part do you disagree?
I disagree. Now, first of all, when you just managed to, minimize the example I gave of the U.S. to the, presence of, gun laws that support access to guns. Now, as a matter of fact, we know that when guns are outlawed, only outlaws have access to guns. That's a truism everywhere in the world. So the fact that, you know, there are gun laws that say people can, you know, bear arms, there are even a constitutional, you know, standard that gives the right to bear arms in the United States, it's not an explanation for the recurrence of, you know, that gun violence or mass shootings. Because mass shootings will happen anyways. For those who mean to do that, they will find a gun, even if.
So why are you not citing this example for other countries? Why are there no mass shootings for other countries?
I picked. They had got there. What happened in where was that? The last was that in was it in Australia, where you had the father and son situation, murder some.
What was the outcome?
Over a festival.
They were arrested.
No,
the one was killed.
Terry, please, you know, let's not, you know, play this, you know, cherry picking game.
No, it's not cherry picking. Barrister Morka, let me tell you something.
No, Terry.
Why I say it's not cherry picking is that the U.S.
You asked the question.
President, just 1 second. No. You say I'm cherry picking. I'm saying I'm not cherry picking because on the issues of arrests and perhaps killing of these people that perpetrate this violence, you remember that the U.S. president said that the Nigerian government isn't doing anything about it.
Terry,
it's not a case of it not happening. It's what happens after.
Terry, please. You know, you are a journalist. I'm sure that this conversation will be enriched by you really taking the time to look at the data and the statistics.
I do have the stats.
Of what, you know, has happened in this country.
I do have the stats. You know, I could read that to you now.
Please. If you're not going to let me speak.
You asked for statistics. I have statistics.
Can I finish my point?
Please go ahead.
I think you're interjecting too much.
Please go ahead.
Let me make my point, okay, so we can have a conversation. If you keep interjecting, I won't, you know,
Please go
say
ahead.
a word.
All right.
Right? Thank you. Now, the point I'm making is that Nigerian law enforcement, our military, our national security institutions around the country have been very vigorous in pursuing and hunting down and arresting and killing perpetrators of this violence. You know the problem? The problem is that every time you see a report, a headline about, you know, how our military confronted, you know, terrorists or bandits and, you know, destroyed them, you know, it gets a mention. But every time our soldiers are ambushed by, you know, terrorists or by bandits and they're killed, it becomes an issue that promotes, you know, I mean, almost like a universal conversation about insecurity in the country. But when our soldiers, you know, are able, as they do routinely, to push back and decimate these vile citizens who hunt our people down, you know, innocent Nigerians down, you know, we somehow it's just, you know, a footnote somewhere. The point I'm making is that we are not, almost by our commentary, giving the kind of, you know, support that we need to give to our men and women in the front line. It was just was it not last week or 2 weeks ago that we again had this experience where some soldiers, you know, were ambushed and were killed? What do you think they were doing? They were not there to, you know, I mean, buy, smoke, you know, I mean, something, or to, you know, eat ice cream. They were in the line of fire, you know, working to protect you and I. You see, if we talk about insecurity today and the levels that we're experiencing, assuming that the government and our military were not in fact doing their job as good as they're doing it, you and I will not be able to sit here and have a conversation, because those who want to do harm, you know, they're confined to these fringes because of the vehemence with which our armed forces are fighting. And I think that we need to, you know, recognize that and commend them, rather than this, you know, every conversation we have, it's always about, you know, they have failed, everything is failed, just because there's an incident. But for every incident that is recorded where we're having this conversation about what happened in Jos, there are multiple tens of incidents where our fighting forces decimate these people.
Absolutely.
But we don't come here to say, you know, I've never been invited. Let me say this and I'll stop.
Okay.
Terry. I've not been invited to a show where the conversation is actually to discuss the gallantry of our soldiers, to give examples of, oh, you know, in this theater, in that theater, our soldiers did ABC. They did good. I have never participated in a show on any platform in this country on that. But every day, every time there's an incident, we conclude that we have failed. That is a twisted perspective.
I'll tell you why.
Totally twisted perspective.
I'll tell you why. Results do not need to be discussed.
So you see,
one second. If there is peace, let's say Iceland, which is referred to as perhaps the most peaceful country, they would not sit down to discuss why there's peace in the country. If tomorrow someone goes and kills 100 people in that country, it would be a big deal. So my question to you is, we commend the military for the actions they take, but we've also heard the military complain about sophistication of equipment. We've also heard the military complain about lack of manpower as well. So I ask, when you say that success has been recorded in the fight against insecurity, why do we see these mass killings from time to time in the country?
Terry, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Before I attempt to answer your question. Is there, like I said, is there a country of the world where there's, where security is like absent? It's about scale. It has always been about scale.
Oh, there are countries where...
Terry, please.
You asked the question.
Terry, that I asked the question does not mean you should...
Answer?
Jump in to... it's a question I'm answering.
Okay.
Maybe some of those questions are rhetorical.
Fair enough.
So please, my point is that most countries of the world confront, one level or degree of insecurity or the other. Most countries of the world. If there's such a utopian country where there's zero crime, and maybe there are, maybe in Scandinavia, maybe you have one of those countries where, the crime rate is so low. But, in the better known parts of this world, you have insecurity as well. They have not managed to eliminate it. Now, we are dealing with that. We're confronting terror. Terror is not Nigerian. Terror is universal. It's global. The war on terror is not a Nigerian war. It's not a phenomenon that's unique or exclusive to Nigeria. It's everywhere. Now, the point I'm making is that, it's an engagement. Nigeria is, has sought partnership. Even the United States we're talking about, Nigeria today is collaborating with the U.S. Some elements of the U.S. security system are in this country helping in that effort. It's a recognition that it's a problem that needs to be solved. And the military has not been better funded ever in this country than they are today. Even if you say that is still insufficient, you are free to make that point. But the point is that relative to what has been, this government has done the most. And, look, I talked to some of the commanding generals, and people in the theater. They recognize that. Yes, are they totally sufficient to, create the kind of fighting force that will, wipe out insecurity in the next, 2 days? Maybe not, but, it's, incremental. But the point is that the will of the government to tackle insecurity is unmistakable. And any suggestion to the contrary would be unfair because, the government is doing that. They are providing, resources. They're providing, I just had a meeting with the outgone Chief of Defense Staff about 2 weeks ago. Spent almost 2 hours just, talking about the situation in the country. And he brought to my attention even things that the public don't know, that the government has done and are still doing. So the point I'm making, Terry, is that we are implicated in this together. And I think that as a people, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder. Because look, if any terrorist, any bandit, wherever they are, I bet that when they open the newspapers and they read, commentary on social media, they will almost feel that Nigerians, are on their side. Because, the way Nigerians, vilify even our troops, dismiss them as having failed, as incompetent, as unable to bring security to the country. Okay. I think we need to rethink that entire,
I get your argument. I get your argument. But from the standpoint of people in Jos, for example, people in Niger State, those in Kwara State, those in Kaduna State who recently experienced this level of terrorism, the question would now be, when the government says it is doing so well to tackle insecurity, why are we still victims? Why do we still suffer so much? That's one. And the second question would now be, would you say clearly that there's been an improvement in security under President Bola Tinubu?
Definitely.
Well, what would you quote to back that claim?
Definitely. It's self-evident.
What would you quote then?
Terry, at some point in the history of this country, recent history of this country, certain parts of Nigeria were inaccessible, were under the effective command and control of terrorists. Parts of Northeast. That's not the case today. At some point in the history of this country, there were people in southern Kaduna and other places that literally just, were forced to move from their homelands. Today, in many of those places, they are back home. I mean, these are not things that's what I'm saying about how we profile these conversations. These are things that should preface even your presentation, here in this conversation. You should at least recognize the progress that has been made or that we're making. Even in the Southeast, a lot of that, killings and all of that has been brought to, the barest minimum. We barely, nobody has confronted me with any sort of mass killings in the Southeast. I mean, we still have problems and challenges, but it's getting better. So when you ask that question in a vacuum, I
didn't ask that in a vacuum. I assure you, I didn't ask that in a vacuum.
Please, let's not do that.
Let me explain that.
Let's not do that.
I cover Parliament.
Let's not do that.
I cover Parliament. I produce a program on this station called The Gavel. Last week, we'll take a look at the security motions that had been raised in Parliament. I dedicated a whole program to bringing out the motions by different lawmakers across different states on this program. So that's why I ask, when you say that there's been improvement, in what area and what do you quote?
But I just answered you.
You didn't quote anything.
What figures?
I'll quote a figure for you. One second. So, under President Bola Tinubu, insecurity rose to 4th on the Global Terrorism Index last year alone. The report was that over 700 people and 50 people were killed in 2025 alone. 46% increase from the previous year. That is statistics. I'm not manufacturing that. So when you say that there's improvement, I want to hear what the government regards as improvement.
I just gave you, examples of that improvement. I don't know where your figures are coming from, and I won't engage it.
Global Terrorism Index.
Yes, Terry, I won't engage it. But you go to Kaduna State, go to the northeast of Nigeria, and have that conversation. People who left home for years have been able to return home and are living in their homelands. You see, Terry, terrorism is, like I said, it's not a Nigerian phenomenon. Terrorism is global. A lot of what you are quoting and the perception that insecurity has worsened over the last sector of time. It's also the pressure that Nigeria is taking from the regional surge in terror. A lot of the perpetrators of this terror are not necessarily Nigerians. They are trans-border criminals who strike and disappear. They come in incursions. Yes, truth is that our border is not as effectively policed, has never been. But it's work in progress. That's not something you do even in 3-4 years. The United States is still struggling to secure its border when it comes to immigration. A lot of our border is open access, and that's a challenge which our governments will have to confront, going forward, to find ways of more effectively policing our borders so that we can reduce the traffic and the influx of people who come here to actually do us harm. But Terry, I think that we need to move from this sort of fixation on just advancing this negative narrative about insecurity.
I don't know how, we as journalists tend to take the brunt of the allegations.
Look, listen, you do that, but see.
No, I was going to ask you, how would you say this to the people in Jos who just lost people? Would you say that to them as
Terry,
well?
listen, first of all, that's almost insensitive for you to be asking this.
Yeah, because you're asking me that, and I'm wondering why, because we're just reeling out.
You are the one that is bringing the victims of, this recent violence into the picture. That's insensitive on your part. I'm sorry. But, when you That's not the conversation. The conversation is about, we can have an objective conversation without descending to that level of sensibilities. You know, that's wrong. I won't engage you on that. You see, because, you know, all I have for those who have been victims recently is sympathy. And that's what the government also has. That's what my party has for them. You know, I wish this never happened to anyone. Let alone, you know, I mean, 27 lives lost. But see, the point to be made here, Terry, you know, is that after all said and done, insecurity is not something that you can entirely prevent. You know, the point you made about the US is that first they kill people and they go after and find the victims. And even if you find the perpetrators, rather, if you find the perpetrators, that does not bring back the victims. So, you know, but no country where anyone means to kill people succeeds entirely, 100%, in preventing the perpetration of that, you know, of that action. They do it, yes, you may catch them later and, you know, arrest them and prosecute them or, you know, punish them. That comes after the fact. The point is that mass killings continue to happen in America. Whether you catch the perpetrators or you don't catch them is secondary. But the point is that you cannot entirely anticipate where insecurity or acts of violence happen.
But from your argument, are you now ruling out those who believe that arresting and prosecuting offenders will serve as a major deterrent?
Why would I rule it out? I mean, you know, see, when I said cherry picking earlier, you're doing it again, Terry. Listen, when I say that, does not mean that we shouldn't arrest or prosecute perpetrators.
So why are we not?
Who says we're not? We're not, you know, look, you know, we are. I am not a security expert. I'm not, you know, the National Security Advisor, but I know that the Office of the National Security Advisor puts out regular information about, you know, successes, killings. That's what I told you. That, you know, the media needs to do more to profile. You know, I would like an opportunity at some point to also come to a show, whether here or elsewhere, where the discussion is about focusing on the successes of, you know, our military. Because these men and women are, you know, they're persons. They're sons and daughters of people. They go out every day to confront evil. And sometimes they pay with their lives. We need to not banalize their sacrifice all the time by this sensational, effort to say that, you know, they have failed. Because when you say, you know, that the government has failed, you are also, you know, almost without, you know, any filter, suggesting that our men and women who are fighting every day to keep us safe also are not doing
absolutely that. Not.
You know,
there are two different things.
They're not two different.
They are two different things because we know how much funding has been an issue for them. Welfare has been an issue for them. Sophistication of equipment has been an issue for them. So if we say the government has failed, it doesn't mean the military has failed. The military probably doesn't have the support. But Barrister Morka, this security situation in Nigeria is a conversation that will stretch. Hopefully, one day we will bring you to speak about the successes. I would be glad to champion them.
I challenge you to do that. That will be the first of a show that I will see, certainly, that I participate in, you know, to focus on that aspect rather than this.
Let's tone it down. Let's tone it down a little and talk about your convention. I think it's one of the most colorful and peaceful conventions I've seen in this country. And I don't know what it means for the party, but it seems like all's going well, and like other parties, there's peace and progress in the All Progressives Congress. What does this mean for the party as we go into the elections?
No, it means everything. It means a lot. We're very happy with how the convention, our national convention, panned out. It was calm. It was focused on the objectives we set. And those objectives were achieved. You know, in particular, the election of the new leadership of the National Working Committee. You know, the convention was a statutory event, especially mandated by our constitution and by, you know, the electoral laws of, you know, the country. That, you know, had to be convened every 4 years to elect those who govern the party, you know, over the next period. But it was also an occasion to tell our story about what this government has done and what the party has done and what Nigerians are to expect going forward. So we, on those levels, it was a very successful convention.
That's great. You know, we cannot not talk about Rivers State because it's neither here nor there. I think that's the only state within your party that it's not entirely clear what it is. Yes, the governor says he's the 001, the leader of the party. But we see your party members delegates from Rivers State being hosted by the FCT minister will see his loyalists emerging emerging from the zonal congresses. What does this mean?
I don't understand what you mean by your question, Terry. Now, the minister of the FCT, the last I checked, is a citizen of Rivers State. And the delegates from Rivers State to the National Convention are also citizens of Rivers State. What exactly is wrong with a citizen hosting his fellow citizen? After a convention, well, I don't see anything that's wrong with that. This has got nothing to do with what you referred to as the status of the governor. The governor is the governor. He's the leader of our party in the state. The minister of the FCT is not a member of the APC. But that does not mean that he is not, as a citizen, free to relate with or interact with anyone. After all, he is of the PDP serving in an APC government. So if he can serve in an APC government and serve with distinction as he's doing, really helping to transform the FCT and make the FCT better than he met it, I don't see what is wrong with him as minister to also interact with his brothers and sisters who were in Abuja for the National Convention.
But that's not the only thing I mentioned. I also mentioned his loyalists winning Rivers State APC chairmanship and winning the zonal chairmanship of South.
His loyalists.
His loyalists.
Who are members of
APC.
Thank you.
The same loyalist, Barrister Morka, that openly said that APC loyalists, APC chairman of Rivers State, saying that direction will come from the minister on who they will support.
Terry, are we not operating a democracy?
You think this is fine with your party?
Terry, please. Are we not? I'm asking you to answer.
Okay.
Before you jump in. Are we not operating a democracy? We are. You see, democracy, you can't really sort of expect or project dictatorship into a democracy. A democracy is a free-willing process and system for the balancing of interests. A democracy is not liable to any sort of gatekeeping or the kind of thing your question suggests, that because they are loyal, you say that they are loyal, according to you, loyal to someone, and therefore they are emerging. As far as the party is concerned, all that matters is whether you're a member of the party, are you a registered member of the party, are you eligible to run for party leadership office. If you are eligible to run, you are free to run. The party is not in the business of telling you who to be loyal to and who not to be loyal to, because loyalty, after all, is a personal disposition. It's a personal, decision to be loyal to whoever you choose.
Would you not be interested in having, say, the state chairman of the APC, Tinubu, working with Governor Fubara? Would you not be interested in that?
No, of course, that's normal and is expected. But that also doesn't mean that working with party leaders or party members means that individuals are not free to exercise their constitutional freedom to also associate with everyone else. You see, they're not mutually exclusive. You can work with the governor while also interacting, pursuant to your constitutional liberty, to interact with or engage with anybody.
But Barrister Morka, can you authoritatively say that Chief Tony Okocha will work with Governor Fubara to deliver the state at state and national level? Can you authoritatively say that?
See, look, Tony Okocha is, our chairman of the APC in Rivers State. He bears an enormous responsibility to, effectively deliver positive outcomes in the next election, in Rivers State. To do so, Chief Tony Okocha understands that he needs to collaborate with any and everyone who will help him achieve that objective to deliver the APC in Rivers State. So, and that's it. That's a universal duty that
was not my question. That was not my question. I was specific. I said, can you authoritatively say that Chief Tony Okocha will work with Governor Fubara?
Why would he not work with the governor? Why would he not work with
Because
the
he's chosen,
APC?
well, he's chosen to work with the minister instead.
You see,
I think it's almost suggesting that the APC would take the result.
I was not going to say that. You are the one making the allegation.
What allegations?
That he's working with the minister and not working with the
He
government.
said it clearly that he would. He's pledged loyalty to the minister.
You are making the allegation. See,
are you unaware?
I told you.
Are you unaware that he's pledged loyalty to the minister?
Terry.
No, it's a simple question, Barrister Morka.
Terry, listen to me. Listen to me.
Yes.
You know, there's some things we shouldn't be discussing. You're asking me to get into the mind and the world of an individual to tell you, I speak for the party. I don't speak for, Chitonio Kocha, even when he's the chairman of, our party in River State. I am not his spokesman. I'm the spokesman of the All Progressives Congress, the APC. And so you're asking me to descend to that level to get into, some, really mucky, private matters of an individual. I don't invite you to do that for me. I won't do that for you. So don't ask me to do that. I won't.
That's not what I'm asking you to do.
That's what you're asking me to do.
I completely understand. Just as we wrap up this conversation, I just want to get a quick thought on Senator Rabiu Kwankwaso joining the ADC. Now, these three men, Peter, Atiku, and Kwankwaso, came in second, third, and fourth in the last election. Put their votes together, outweigh President Bola Tinubu's votes. Do you have concerns?
No. No, we don't.
Okay.
Have any concerns? Because, as I always say, we're focused on, building our own, political wherewithal to, engage in that election and to convince Nigerians to vote this president. Now, the president won the vote he did, even when he was not president. He had never been president. He was not the president before that. He won that vote. Now that he's president and has done for Nigeria what many of his predecessors didn't do, couldn't do, in terms of repositioning this country for steady, stable growth and progress, I bet that this president will, I think, win the vast majority of support of Nigerians, in the next election. So those numbers don't say anything.
All right.
I think we should look out to what is to come.
We will have another conversation because I want us to have an extensive conversation on the achievement of the president, which will sell him because, it's what he's done that will sell him going forward. Barrister Felix Morka, thank you very much.
Thank you
for your time on Political Paradigm.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, I've been speaking with Barrister Felix Morka, who is the National Publicity Secretary of the All Progressives Congress. We'll take a break now. When we return, we'll have a discussion with a member of the People's Democratic Party, a former lawmaker, on the recently concluded convention of the PDP. Stay with us.